So, welcome everyone to this webcast. I'm Tom Cross. I'm the Director of Security Research here at Lancope. And this webcast is going to go over the results of a very interesting study that we commissioned on computer security incident response teams. Here at Lancope, of course, we make a product that collects network from routers and switches, and one of the ways that people use our product is to investigate security incidents on their networks. And so we wanted to understand that subject a little bit better. You know, we're hearing a lot of news, particularly over the past few weeks, about major security breaches at retailers, for example. You know, how well are prepared our organizations to deal with these kinds of security incidents, and you know, what's happening out there in terms of incident response preparedness. So, in order to understand this subject, we turn to the Ponemon Institute. The Ponemon Institute is really highly regarded in the security and privacy world for going out and collecting really reliable data about business practices around security and privacy. And so we felt that they were the right choice for an organization to go out and try to answer some of these questions with us. And so we're very privileged to have Larry Ponemon on the webinar today. He's the chairman of the Ponemon Institute, and he's going to talk with me about the results of the survey that we did and some of the data that we collected. Larry, welcome to the webcast.
Oh, thank you very much, Tom. It's a pleasure to co-present with you today, and I think we have some very interesting material to share with our audience. I know that you're dealing with a snowstorm in Atlanta, and I kind of fully, my heart's with you, buddy, because, you know, I live in northern Michigan, and we just hated it so much this winter that we abandoned everything, and now we're in New Mexico. We're still a little cold.
No. Had a few brave coworkers who seemed to have spent the night in the office last night because they couldn't get home. So it was quite an interesting 24 hours.
Oh, well, anyway, I'm very glad you're healthy and you're on the call today and hopefully in a nice warm place. Again, for those people that don't know who Ponemon Institute is, and we're not Pokemon Institute, Ponemon Institute is a research company, and we're very boring. We are linearly focused on 3 topics: privacy, data protection, and information security. We've been in existence for now 13 years, and we've managed to build an infrastructure, an affiliate network in 26 countries around the globe that kind of allow us to do global research or research in all global regions of the world. So we're very, very pleased with having the opportunity to work with great companies like Lancope and others, and hopefully we'll get to see many of you at RSA, the RSA conference in San Francisco next month. With that being said, let's kind of go to our next slide. And in the next slide, we basically are looking at some survey sample statistics. And this is kind of I'm a research wonk, and Tom, you're the brilliant guy, so obviously you're going to wow the audience with your knowledge, but I'll just talk a little bit about some of our survey results. This is a U.S. study and a U.K. study. In total, we had over 20,000 folks who we call our sampling frame, and these are people in IT and IT security with bona fide credentials. And so, as you probably know, Ponemon Institute manages sampling frames or panels that focus primarily on folks in the privacy, data protection, or information security field. We basically use screening criteria so that these are people who are involved, actively involved in their company's CSIRT activities. And in total, we have a good-sized sample of 674 completed and reliable surveys, which is a good response rate of 3.3% to our total sampling frame. The U.S. component is 357 practitioners, and the UK is 317 qualified respondents. It was really cool. We actually got a lot of similarity between the US and the UK, and we made a decision, rather than show these results separately, to consolidate those. There are just very, very few instances in our sample where there are market differences or statistically significant differences. So when we look at these results, you know, kind of put on your thinking cap, folks, We're talking about both U.S. and U.K. and a total of 674 completed surveys. Go to our next slide. This beautifully colored pie chart kind of shows the distribution of our respondents by their job title. And you'll notice the largest slice of this very nice pie, 34%, are people who are in the category called technician. You know, these are rank and file folks. These are people who are very knowledgeable and they are hands-on. They're kind of managing the security infrastructure for their company. Then we go from that extreme, which is red, senior, we look at the top of the list, senior executive and vice president. We do have some people who are very senior, and these people represent a very small percentage of the total sample. We also have a fair number of directors, managers, and supervisors. So if you did the math and you added up the percentages of folks who are at or above the supervisory level, it's more than 50%, which suggests that we have a highly experienced group of respondents. So this is one of our quality measures. Go to the next slide, please. Now we have two pie charts. The first pie chart off to the left side of the screen is the organizational size, which we measure in head count. Why do we measure it in head count? Well, when you ask people how large is your company, if you're a financial guy or an accounting person, you probably know the size of your organization in terms of revenue. But if you're a security person or an IT person, you're going to get a more accurate response when you ask them about the head count of the organization. So we use head count as a surrogate of organizational size in the study. And we really have quite a nice mix, ranging from companies with less than 500 people, so that would fall into the SMB, the small to medium-sized business, the companies with more than 75,000 people, which is a big monster company. And we even have some companies with, you know, in the six figures and beyond. The next graph shows the distribution by industry. And like many Ponemon studies, we like doing a study that cuts across different industry categories, and I'm very pleased that it does. That's good news. But on the negative side, the bad news is it's hard to then do segment analysis by industry, except where we have large segments. And if you look at the pie chart, financial services is clearly the largest segment at 20%, public sector at 14%, and then it drops to 10% for health, pharmaceutical, and this also includes biotech. Okay, go to our next slide.
So, go ahead, Larry.
Go ahead, Tom, if you would take the slide.
Oh, sure. So this slide just sort of summarizes the salient finding from the report and gives you some guideposts for the rest of the data we're going to be talking through. We learned some interesting things from the survey. The first thing we learned is that investment is critical for effective cyber incident response programs. We'll show you this. We learned that our respondents felt that having a more robust incident response program would have a big impact on their ability to protect their organization, but that they weren't getting the level of investment that they thought that they needed in that area. And you know, we had a number of questions that we asked that sort of measured how well prepared organizations are from different perspectives, and many of those results were not as good as we had hoped. Basically, the results show that there are some deficiencies in the level of preparedness that our respondents' organizations have. And a big takeaway is that management is largely unaware of the cyber threats that their organization faces. You know, obviously when you end up on the front page because of a breach, you know, your executives are in the loop, but it seems that in general executives are not in the loop, and that may be part of the reason that this area is not getting the level of investment that it probably needs to get. You know, so we also talk about how to fix that problem. One of the things that's necessary are metrics management. So it said that you can't manage something if you can't measure it. And so we asked people what metrics they're using. We have some interesting data about that. And in addition, we asked what tools the incident responders need. And what they told us is they need network audit trails, which is pretty close and near and dear to our heart at Lancope. So let's take a look at some of these survey results that we got.
So thanks, Tom. That was really a good backdrop. And basically, we wanted to know, and this is not the precise question, but approximately, do you anticipate a material security breach in the future? And if I'm reading this correctly, 31% said no. So 1 minus 31%, or 69%, say yes, which is probably not a great finding because it's the vast majority. They're expecting a security breach. Now we also break it apart in terms of yes in more than 1 year, yes within the next year, and yes within the next 6 months. And probably the scariest response here is yes within the next 3 months, and that represents 30%. What's your reaction to this result?
Well, I mean, I think it helps emphasize the fact that organizations do perceive that they are going to have security breaches in the future. And I'm actually most surprised about the 30% that didn't think that that would happen. I like to meet some of those folks who have such an effective computer security program that they never have a security incident in their environment. This slide helps underline the fact that most people do in fact experience these breaches, and they expect to experience incidents in the future.
You know, I think, not to seem too negative, but there's this ignorance is bliss concept, right, where if we don't know there's a problem, we assume there is no problem, and that's probably the wishful thinking people who are saying that that's that 30% or 31%. And we see that all the time. People and companies are not necessarily putting their best foot forward. They're basically managing from the rear, and the end result is they get caught. So at 31%, either it's a halo effect or that ignorance is bliss.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that to a certain degree, if your security practice is so ineffective that you're not detecting the things that are happening in your environment, then you may in fact believe that you don't have a problem, and that could be showing up to a certain extent in these results.
Thanks, Tom. And this slide is actually pretty cool as well. It shows how can your organization most effectively mitigate future security breaches. And 68%, by the way, obviously there's more than one choice because it adds up to more than 100%, is better incident response capabilities. Number 2 is threat intelligence or IP reputation services. Number 3 is improved vulnerability audits and assessments at 44%. Then improved patch management, which has plagued us, the security industry, for decades. It doesn't get solved. And then higher quality professional staffing. These seem to be the big 5. But again, at the top of that list, incident response capabilities, very important. Tom, what do you think?
I mean, I was excited by this result because it validated that a lot of people are of the same mind that I am. I wasn't sure what they were going to pick. Were they going to, say that they needed better patch management or better prevention? Well, actually what they're saying is they need better incident response capabilities. And to a certain extent, that could be counterintuitive because you think about incident response as something that you do after a breach happens in order to clean it up. And if you want to prevent security incidents from happening, you'd think you'd want to invest in preventative approaches and preventative technologies. But I think the reality is more complicated than that. By investigating breaches, you learn what the weak points in your infrastructure are, and you can feed that knowledge back into how your organization protects itself. And when we're talking about some of the sophisticated attacks that are happening today, these attackers understand how to evade a lot of the preventative technologies that we have. And so it actually is the case that incident response capabilities do help protect the organization from attack. And I think that this result helps demonstrate that IT professionals realize that, and they do think that better incident response capabilities are really where their organizations need to be focusing their efforts right now from a security program standpoint.
Now, Tom, we have a comment or a question. Do you want to do that, or should we take that at the end?
Well, I think actually, Larry, let's take those at the end so that we can make sure that we have time to get through all of our data points, and then we'll go back in and grab some of these questions if that's all right.
That's great. I appreciate that. I think that makes good sense. Okay, so now on this a very colorful slide, this looks like New Mexico colors, by the way. Good choice. Do you have a fully functional CSIRT? And 66% say yes, which is, you know, I think a good result. It's a positive result, and 34% say no. Keep in mind that some of the companies that responded to this question are smaller size companies, and while we didn't find a significant correlation, I would imagine that some of the no's are smaller companies or companies that, you know, don't have a mature security program. Does this result surprise you at all?
Not necessarily, but it you know, goes to show you that some people don't even have an incident response program. I think you should have a program regardless of how big you are. The size of your organization really doesn't you know, factor into whether or not you're going to be targeted. The size of your organization does play a role in how much resources or how many people you devote to the problem, but you know, you should have some preparedness for security incident response regardless of how big you are.
No, that's great, and I agree with you completely. You know, small doesn't necessarily mean, you know, that's a license to be incompetent. Well, we're just small, so we don't really need to have we don't have a bullseye on our back. That's not true. We know that a lot of small companies is a good entree point, good in the sense to a bad guy. It's easier to break in to a small organization and use the business relationship to larger organizations as a flow-through, if you will, for different types of attacks. So we've actually seen some of that over the last, especially over the last couple of years. Now this slide, there are actually two pieces of information that are related. First question is, what percentage of your security budget is spent on incident response preparedness? And if you kind of look at the graph, 50% say less than 10%. I'm not trying to say that's a good result or a bad result, but my gut feel tells me we're probably not spending enough resources on incident response if it is, in fact, such an important feature as we just documented in a previous question. So that's kind of on the negative side. On the maybe positive side, is it increasing, or is funding decreasing, or is it staying at about the same level? And the number one response is staying at about the same level. That's 45%. But more importantly, look at the increase at 34%. That's increasing, 18% decreasing. So basically what this tells me is more organizations recognize that it requires more funding. And so for many companies, it's either staying the same or increasing. Only for a very small number of companies is it decreasing. And if it's decreasing, you probably wonder why. Why would that be happening? It's very unlikely that they have overspent on this. Maybe it's cost constraint. What do you think, Tom?
I think that I had a negative reaction to this slide or this data that we collected on how, you know, whether the amount of money was increasing or decreasing. I think this is concerning, and I think there's a couple of reasons for that. If you think over the past couple of years what's been happening, I think it's clear that you know, the kinds of computer security incidents that people are experiencing are still, you know, there's a regular drumbeat of major breaches. The sophistication of the sort of incidents we're seeing has gone up. And also, you know, just in general, like IT continues to be a larger and more central part of people's businesses. So when you take those two factors and you put them together, I would think that, you know, most organizations would be investing more in incident response. But it seems that they aren't. Most organizations are not changing their investment level there, and some are actually decreasing the incident response capabilities that they have. And so, you know, if you contrast that with the first slide, which where you know, our survey respondents said that better incident response was the best thing that you could do to mitigate future breaches, like those things sort of are in contrast as far as I'm concerned. It seems that there's a disconnect here between what our respondents are saying should be done and what our respondents say is actually happening.
Yeah, thank you very much, Tom. I agree with that completely. If we go to our next slide. think we have some other interesting results. Here we ask, we're trying to understand how many employees are dedicated to incident response. And, you know, the gold standard would be having people who are fully dedicated. You know, basically it becomes a real full-time job. And then in some organizations, people wear more than one hat. So they're not necessarily part-time employees, but they're part-time on the incident response front. And what we basically see here on the full-time side, 45%, when the numbers say that there's really no one who's full-time because it's kind of in the zero category. And that means 55% basically have one or more, but very, very few organizations have more than 10 or even more than 6 people who are full-time, fully dedicated. Probably not too surprising for smaller size companies or a mid-market company, but if these results hold true for, you know, companies with more than 75,000 employees, this could represent a problem. And you basically do see the distributions between the full-time and the part-time, where on the part-time side, 44%, the most common response, is between 2 and 5 people. Tom, what's your take on this?
So my concern is that, and obviously if you're a small organization, you're not going to have people devoted to incident response all the time, but you know, these results are pretty strong. And I think that what happens in practice, and I've seen this happen, is that the people who are responsible for dealing with a computer security incident have some quote-unquote day job that they are also responsible for that is really what they're supposed to do. And, you know, at any given time, they have, you know, milestones they're attempting to reach with that regular responsibility. They have tasks that they're supposed to complete. And, you know, an incident happens, it's unpredictable. They're asked to set aside that regular responsibility and go focus on the incident. And the problem is that the people who need the other things that they are producing, you know, still need those things to be produced. And so there's this conflict of interest between their regular responsibility and the need to respond to the incident. And so what happens is that you know, some triage often occurs with respect to these incidents, but then some of the follow-through can take a long time. And we actually see that in some of our metrics, that the full investigation and resolution of these incidents, you know, can take many, many weeks. And I think that, you know, part of it is that part of it is this competition between someone's day job and their incident response responsibility. And the problem is that if you have an ongoing incident in your environment and you haven't contained it, but people are going back to their day jobs and not continuing to pursue that containment, then there could be follow-on damage that happens to the organization until the incident is fully contained. I've seen you know, that unfold before. So, you know, obviously everyone cannot afford to have some sort of full-time staff, but it's important for people to be cognizant of the fact that there's some conflict here, and to try to manage people that are responsible for incident response in such a way that they have the leeway to focus on incidents when that's what they need to be doing.
That's great, Tom. Thank you for your insight. Going to the next slide, this is generally a positive result. We try to determine how much job-related experience do folks on the incident response team have. And what we basically find is the number 1 and 54%, so in terms of the most experienced category, more than 10 years, then 36% between 6 and 10 years, and then we get to kind of lower levels of experience. So it does show that people who are, in fact, either even part-timers or full-timers to incident response really do have quite a bit of relevant experience. And it's self-reported, so you know, someone might say, yeah, it's relevant because I did X, Y, and Z. I was a cryptology expert in the Navy or whatever, but it doesn't necessarily have to mean incident response specific experience, but definitely IT security expertise.
Yeah, I think this is one of the best or most positive results in the survey, and you know, clearly people are taking some of the most skilled IT professionals in our organization and making them responsible for this, and so that does indicate that they are taking it seriously. So we were happy to see that result.
Now, here's another result about the infamous consultant, the third-party consultant. Do you use a third-party consultant as part of your incident response team or plan? And basically, we find that, consultants are used, and 42% of them, we're looking at the pie chart to the right, so 42% fall into the category of primarily these consultants are used to augment the skill set of the incident response team. So it's not replacing the incident response team, but it's augmenting. It's basically an addition to in-house experts. Let's see, if you kind of look at the green, the very top, a primary first responder to incident response would only be a small fraction. I think that is that 10%? The print is a little small. I apologize. I need my reading.
I need to make my window bigger as well.
No, I know. I think I'm getting old here. I used to be able to read that. They're going to revoke my pilot's license, I think, because of my eyesight.
Yes, the primary data point is 10%, and it's 42% for augment the skill and 31% for augment the capacity.
Great, I appreciate that. And then the graph, which I can read on the other side here of the page, is what do we use these consultants for? And number one would be forensics and investigative, and then followed by legal or law firms, followed by global audit or consulting firms. These would be firms like an Accenture or a Deloitte or my old firm, PwC. Risk management, which is only 9%, and then regional and or local consultants, smaller, probably niche consultants in the that are considered local or regional. Any surprises here?
No, but what this data point set does is they help explain to people who don't understand what they should be doing, like what the role of third-party consultants actually is. I've heard people ask, well, why don't you just outsource that entirely? And there's a lot of reasons why you don't do that. One of which is that you need people involved who actually understand your business and understand your infrastructure, and your third-party consultants are not going to know that. But at the same time, it's important to have, I think, relationships with third-party consultants set up before an incident happens. And one of the reasons for that is the need to augment your capacity. So if you have a serious security incident and you need to contain it, and it's taking a long time to understand and contain the incident, you may want people to be working that 24/7. I mean, that often happens. And the reality is that human beings aren't designed to function that way. And I've seen incident response scenarios where the incident response team is making coffee at 4 a.m. for several days trying to get the incident under control, and people end up making mistakes. And when you're dealing with something like this, all the details are really important. So if you have a way to augment your staff's capacity, you can bring people in to shift other people out and give people a chance to get a rest. And that's really important when you're handling a major security incident. In addition, third-party consultants can offer some skill augmentation. So, for example, if you've gotten hit with a sophisticated targeted attack and there's custom malware, I've actually seen many organizations over the past few years who have a full-time on-staff malware analyst because of the need to look at sophisticated malware that's coming into their environment that's targeted at them. But many people can't afford that or can't retain that skill set, and so it's things like that you can turn to professional forensic auditors. Another thing that comes up is, if you're interested in pursuing like a law enforcement investigation or potentially criminal charges against somebody, then there are certain skills that people have with respect to maintaining the integrity of evidence that is really useful to be able to bring in from an outside firm. So there's a lot of good uses for third-party consultants, but it's important that we understand how to use them correctly. And I think this data, leads the way, I guess. So if you're wondering what you should be doing, I think our survey respondents know the right answers.
Well, thanks again, Tom. Kind of moving to our next graph, how frequently do you assess the readiness of your incident response team? And if I'm reading this correctly, unfortunately I can read this at 29%, not on a regular schedule, which is probably not a good result, and 21% say on an ongoing basis, whatever that means, and then 18% say, well, this is kind of a depressing category called readiness is not assessed at all. What's your reaction to some of these data points, Tom?
Well, I think it goes back to you cannot figure out what you need to do when it happens, because everyone's going to be sort of stressed out by this situation, and you know, the ability to get all the right people in the right place and get people authorized to do what they need to do is very challenging to sort out. And you know, in the midst of an incident, I think people need to understand beforehand what it is that they're supposed to do. You need to have a fire drill, you know, the fact is that if you're regularly you know, having fire drills, then you know, people maintain that awareness of you know, what they're supposed to do when a real incident occurs. I think these results are actually fairly healthy. Frankly, there seem to be a lot of people that are doing some amount of assessment, and so that's good. But certainly, I think a huge chunk of our respondents are either not assessing at all, or they're not assessing on a regular schedule. And so the reality is that they may not really, there may be unforeseen problems that arise when they actually end up in an incident because they haven't gone through this process.
Thanks, Tom. Okay, so now, do you have a PR and analyst relationship plan in place in the event of a breach? PR means public relations. The idea is that if you have a problem like this, and if it's external, it could be damaging to reputation and brand. And so you would think that, you know, hey, part of the team would be someone who, in fact, has these skills and knows how to communicate. Because we've seen disastrous communication issues. I mean, if you will go back to, I remember TJX, and they had a massive security breach and lots of data, millions and tens of millions of records exposed. And they had like 3 different people who were from the company who were commenting on the data breach with media. And they were 3 different stories, and it just kind of reduced credibility completely because of that. So having that expertise, I think, is important. And, of course, 75% of our respondents said they do not have a public relations and or analyst relationship plan as part of their incident response readiness. Are you surprised by this?
Oh yeah. So Larry, I mean, it would be wonderful if we could, you know, go to hundreds of organizations and do a thorough audit on their incident response readiness. And the reality is that with this survey, what we're trying to do is come up with questions that provide data points that give us a sense of where people are at. And I think that you know, this is a pretty key indicator that tells me that people are not as prepared as they should be. If you consider some of the things that have been going on over the past couple of months, if you worked for one of these major retailers that had one of these security incidents, obviously you've been doing a lot of interaction with the press. And like I said on the previous slide, you know, it's very difficult to sort out a plan for dealing with this beforehand, or rather in the moment, because people are very sort of spun up about what's happening. And the reality is that you're going to be much more effective if you've thought through the process in advance. You know who needs to be involved in the decision-making process, and you have put some thought into, you know, when you're going to do certain things. So when are you going to make the decision to disclose information to the public? What information specifically are you going to disclose? It's good to have agreement about those things beforehand, so you're not arguing about them in the midst of a crisis. And so when I look at this statistic, this tells me that only a small number of our respondents have actually sat down and thought through all of that. And so that to me is an indicator that they haven't put enough thought into how they're going to deal with security incidents when they occur. And frankly, that could mean that there are other deficiencies in their preparedness. So this data point to me was particularly important.
Well, thanks, Tom. And I'm getting the cue from our producer that we might be running out of time, so I'm going to talk now fast.
Okay. Well, I think we've got enough time to get through our other data points, but.
Yeah, and for those folks that are submitting questions, if we can't get to your questions today, we promise to get to you maybe through email or some other telepathy or some other way of getting back to you, because I think we have some good questions here. So anyway, in this slide, very quickly, we asked the question: does the organization have a multidisciplinary insider threat management program? Because you need different skill sets sometimes to accomplish to deal with these issues. And 54% actually said no. Tom, what do you think?
So sometimes the incident that you're investigating is not caused by an external attacker. It was caused by malicious action by someone that works in your organization. And so everyone needs to have an insider threat management program. And really the problem with them is that people see it as a computer security issue, and they expect IT to deal with it. And you can see that in this set of answers, that many of our respondents have an insider threat management program, but it's only within the IT department. And the fact is that that's not a realistic way of handling that particular problem. Insider threat is not a technical problem. It involves someone who works for your organization, and an effective way of dealing with that involves a collaboration between IT, human resources, legal, and the management, in order to be able to effectively identify potential threats and to be able to investigate them correctly. So there's some great resources out there about insider threat. I know that Lancope has some webinars about insider threat. So I don't want to dwell on the topic, but I think this was an interesting data point in that it validated my concern that a lot of organizations are looking at that as purely an IT problem and not thinking about it as a multidisciplinary problem that needs coordination across their organization.
Very cool response. Thank you, and I agree completely with what you said. On this slide, we asked the question, are you sharing threat intelligence? And the idea that the companies team up or industry groups team up and they start sharing important data. And the most common response at 45%, and if you do the math, this basically is more, you could have more than one response, but the number one response is information is neither received nor shared. Well, that's not a happy camper result.
With all the talk about threat intelligence sharing that's been going on, it's surprising to see that most organizations are just not doing it at all. And if they are doing it, maybe they're receiving information. They got a threat feed like Flick, which is something that Lancope sells, but they're not sharing information that they discover in their investigations out to other people. Only 12% of our respondents said that they were actually working with their peers, and I think this is information. A lot more work to do. If you're facing particularly targeted, sophisticated,
Tom, you're breaking up. Tom, can you hear me? Folks, I want to apologize. I know that because of weather, Tom is doing the call from a cell phone from his home. And I think, Tom, we lost you. So what I'll do is we'll wait a couple of seconds, and then I'll kind of be a surrogate for Tom, but a very poor surrogate, because Tom is really the guy with all the knowledge. I'm just, again, a research guy. Tom, are you back? Okay, well, let's kind of look at the slide here, frequency of cyber threat briefings. And here we basically see that the number one category where who are we briefing is IT, the IT management or the CIO organization. But I think what's most interesting about this slide, go all the way to the bottom, you'll see board of directors at 12% and executive management at 20%. In other words, the vast majority of respondents said that they're not actually reporting the results or the postmortem of an incident to senior level management. That's a big problem, right? And especially as organizations are saying that there's more accountability by the CEO, or they want more accountability at the board level, maybe through the audit committee or the risk management committee. So this suggests that there's a communication issue. We're not reporting to those folks. That's how I read it. So where are we reporting? Where are we doing these cyber threat briefings? Primarily to the IT organization. So I hate to say this, but it's like we're talking to ourselves. We're just doing it there. Again,
Larry,
oh, I'm sorry, you're back.
Well, I am back. I'm going to chalk it up to the weather apocalypse here in Atlanta. My call died, so I'm sorry about that, but I got back. And I mean, this to me was one of the most important results in our survey, because it told us that, I mean, executive management is just not being briefed about threats to the organization. And I think that, first of all, executive management is often the target of these attacks. If you think about spear phishing, you've got to at least educate these people about the sort of risks that might be personally targeted at them. But it's also important that they are aware of the threats to the organization as a whole. And I'm concerned that people are not reporting because they don't want to report bad news. If you're the IT security guy and you tell the boss, hey, our organization is potentially targeted, he's going to turn back at you and say, well, why is that? And what are you doing about it? And why do we have these problems, right? So you might be reticent to be totally open with the management team about the incidents that you have. And the other issue is that, sometimes IT security folks don't communicate using the sort of language that executive managers want to hear. That they talk in terms of vulnerabilities and exploits and compromised machines and malware, and those are technical things that are not really of the mindset of the executive leadership team. They want to hear about business continuity and the costs associated with mitigating these incidents and downtime and things like that. And so you've got to translate some of the security threats that you face from a technical perspective into a financial perspective in order to make them relevant to the executive leadership team. And I think that a lot of folks in IT security don't know how to make that translation happen.
Oh, great. I'm really glad that you commented on that slide. Thank you. Now, on the next slide, it's a two-parter. If we kind of look at the right-hand side, let's start with the left. This is kind of a yes, no, unsure response, and it's a response to, do you have metrics to measure the effectiveness of incident response, and do you have metrics to measure the detection and containment of incidents? And the tallest bar in both cases is a no response. And for those people that said yes, and not the unsure, those people are kind of operating in their own world. But for those that said yes, we looked at really 4 categories of commonly defined categories, including mean time to fix, that's the MTTF, mean time to identify, mean time to know the root cause, and the mean time to verify. And the most common category for those that do have metrics is the mean time to fix, followed by the mean time to identify. Tom, what do you think?
Well, like I said in the beginning, if you can't measure something, you can't manage it. Particularly going back to the previous point from the previous slide, if you can't measure it, then you're not going to be able to communicate about it in quantitative terms. And so, that's really what the executive leadership team is looking for from you from a financial perspective. You got to translate the experience you're having into dollars and cents. And in order to be able to do that, you have to be able to quantify it. So metrics are incredibly important. At the same time, these are all time-focused metrics. You don't want to manage your incident response team purely based on the speed at which they react to incidents, because you need to make sure that incidents are thoroughly investigated and contained. And so if you just push the fast forward button, you can create a situation where people are cutting corners in order to meet your requirements, and that's not what you want. However, time-based metrics can be very valuable in terms of understanding the overall impact of the organization, as well as measuring the consequences of things that you do to improve your incident response capacity or the tooling that they have. You know, if you go and invest in more incident response capabilities, it should translate into a more efficient response or a more thorough response, and you know, keeping track of these things is useful in that respect. I also want to say that you want to track the incidents themselves, how many incidents you're experiencing, what kind of incident they are, how far into your organization they got, and how the attacker managed to breach the organization's defenses. Because those kinds of statistics can tell you things like what are the vulnerabilities in your infrastructure that attackers are targeting most frequently, and that can help you prioritize some of your other security efforts. So metrics around incidents are an incredibly important data source, I think, for an IT security organization.
Very cool. Thank you. And you might want to, can you take this slide, Tom? Because
yeah, I can. So, I mean, so we, in addition to asking what kind of metrics people were using, we asked them, you know, what kind of what results they were getting from their measurements. And, you know, this slide shows you there's sort of a process here where you try to identify the threat, and then you know what the root cause was, and then you fix the threat, and then somebody comes along and verifies that the threat was fixed. And if you look at these responses, this goes to what I'm saying. People are able to identify the threat fairly quickly, but it takes weeks or months for them to sort of contain the incident and understand how it happens, and then to fix the systems that were affected and bring them back online and fix the vulnerabilities that were exploited. And so the whole process of working the incident can take a very long time, and I think that's important to consider when you think about the total impact that the incident has on the organization from a business continuity standpoint, and from you know, in terms of the impact on operations. You know, until things are fixed, that incident could continue to have a negative impact on the organization. I want to comment on the fact that our responses in this case seem to be more optimistic than other surveys that have asked similar questions. So if you look at the Verizon Data Breach Incident Report, which is one that I have a great respect for, or if you look at Mandiant's M-Trends report, which I also really like, their mean time to identify was way, way longer than the one that we got in our survey. I think that there are two potential reasons for that. The first is that they are measuring actual incidents, whereas we're measuring the perceptions of people who are familiar with incident response. And so there may be some halo effect here where IT professionals believe that they're able to identify incidents much more quickly than they actually can. In addition, they may be looking at different data. So, you know, our survey asked IT professionals to deal with all kinds of incidents, from a simple malware infection to really complicated compromises, whereas the Verizon and Mandiant are mostly just dealing with the really big stuff, the stuff that's so complicated that you would hire an outside consulting firm or you would involve law enforcement. And so it may be that the sort of incidents that they're measuring tend to be the ones that are harder to identify and ultimately harder to resolve. But regardless, clearly even simple incidents are taking too long to resolve in our view, and that work could be done to improve the amount of time it takes to understand and resolve these incidents.
Great response, thank you. This slide kind of speaks for itself. What are the most effective tools for detecting security breaches? And the number one response is the analysis of NetFlow or packet captures, followed by SIM, followed by intrusion prevention or detection systems, IPS or IDS, followed by IP, reputation, and threat feed services, and at the very bottom, but still a healthy 56%, say antivirus. Any reaction to this, Tom?
Well, this is obviously a validating data point for us because we build NetFlow audit trails, and what it's telling us is that our survey respondents believe that those audit trails are a key a tool that they use to identify security breaches within their environment. So collecting NetFlow, collecting packet captures, collecting syslog, those are the things that people said are the most important things for them to be doing beyond preventative measures like intrusion detection and antivirus. And so I think that was interesting, and I think it helps underline the value of those audit trails in protecting an environment from attack.
Very cool indeed. And now the most important slide of the day, the recommendations. Can you help me with the recommendations, Tom?
I can. So, I mean, first of all, you need to have an incident response team. Don't be one of the, I think, 34% who said they don't have one or it's not fully functional. You want experienced full-time members if you can. Clearly, a lot of our incident responders are very experienced people. You want to assess the readiness of your team and to make sure that they're prepared, and you want to work through some of the scenarios that could occur beforehand so that you're prepared in advance. You want to provide clearly defined rules of engagement for the incident response team, so you don't want to have a situation where managers in the business are refusing to allow the incident response team to do the things they need to do in the midst of a crisis. You want to involve multidisciplinary areas of the organization in the incident response process. It's not just a technical problem, particularly if it involves an employee. You want to invest in the right tools that the incident response team needs in order to be effective. That you can't, if you don't have the right audit trails in place, then there's no way you can investigate the incident because you don't have a record of what happened. So you've got to have those records there. It's also really important to use metrics to measure what's happening in your organization from an incident response standpoint. And that's important because it allows you to really understand what's happening with your business from a security breach standpoint, and B, communicate that information to the leadership team of your company in a quantitative fashion that allows you to get a real financial sense of the impact that security breaches are happening in your organization. And I think that it's really important that CEOs today are in the loop, that they're aware of the security threats that their organizations face. It's clearly a high-level discussion if you consider some of the things that have been disclosed over the past couple of months. People need to know what's happening, and they need to have a financial understanding of its impact. And that's something that IT security teams ought to be doing. And hopefully, if they do that, if they improve that level of communication, then they'll get the resources that they need financially in order to build the incident response capabilities that they ought to have. And I want to leave with one thought. We didn't include this result in the survey results that we showed here, but our survey respondents, 81% of them said that if they had the right tools and the right people and the right resources, that they could effectively protect their organization against attack. And I was really surprised by that result. That's a great deal of confidence from our survey respondents that they could actually be effective if they were properly equipped. And I think that the reality is that they just aren't as equipped as they ought to be in some cases. So this slide, has the URL for the report, which you can go download. There's a lot of other data points that we collected that we didn't discuss here that are very interesting, and some analysis there. And hopefully, this is something that you can share with colleagues as well who are interested in thinking about incident response. Thank you very much, Larry, for coming on our webcast today. It's really great to have your insight here, and I think you guys did a great job with this survey and really helped illuminate some data points that are very helpful for people in understanding this problem.
Well, thank you, Tom. Thanks for making my day. It's always a pleasure to talk with you, and hopefully